now still risks too many American lives. Joining me now, Maryland's Republican Governor Larry Hogan. Governor Hogan, it's good to see you. I want to start with the news that in this bill, the legislation that's coming out that will fund some of the small business loans, it's also going to fund testing. It's also going to fund hospitals, according to Secretary Mnuchin. But they're not going to provide money for states. And I know you've been outspoken. I quoted you to Secretary Mnuchin. He said maybe in the next legislation will there be funding for states. What's your response?
Well, first of all, we're just hopeful that we can get all these parties to agree and put aside the partisanship in the U.S. Senate, get the administration and the senators on both sides of the aisle to reach some kind of a deal to get this done, because we do need to get this money out for our small businesses, and certainly the hospitals need help as well. I spoke with Secretary Mnuchin several times last week. We also had a discussion with the president, and while we're a little disappointed, the NGA is pushing, it wasn't just me, but the National Governors Association was pushing for this funding, which is desperately needed for the states if we want to get this economic recovery moving. But that they did commit to work with us in the fourth stimulus bill. The governors all across the country, Republicans and Democrats of the National Governors Association, were pushing to try to get it included in this bill. I don't think the deal's finalized yet, but look, we do not want to hold up funding to these small businesses, and we hope that the Democrats and the Republicans in the Senate can come together in a bipartisan way and get something moving for the American people.
I know you've seen this video from Tacoma Park, Maryland, video on Friday from local news that shows hundreds of Marylanders lined up outside Mega Mart stores for a free food giveaway. They are obviously desperate. Many of them, I'm assuming, have no income at all because of the shutdown. What do you say to your constituents about when you're going to open the state up? And what goes through your mind when you see the desperation evident in the video?
Well, first of all, my heart goes out to all the people that are struggling, and we've been focused on this. It's this twin problem of fighting to try to save people's lives, but we're also very concerned about the people who are not able to work and the small businesses that are hurting, which is why I'm a lifelong small business person myself. I ran for governor because I was concerned about people losing their jobs. My goal is to try to get us open as quickly as we possibly can, but in a safe way. The president's own guidelines say that you should have 14 days of declining numbers before you start to consider phase one of a reopening. And we have increasing numbers every day here in the Washington region, Governor Northam, myself, and Mayor Bowser in the district. So we're not at the point yet where we can, but we have a very detailed reopening plan we've been working on for weeks. We're anxious to get people back to work. The folks that were lined up for food, look, it came from a good place. This grocery store was offering free bags of food, which is why so many people showed up. But they didn't coordinate with the local authorities, and you had some crowds, which was unfortunate. But look, we put $8 million into local food banks to try to make sure that people were not going hungry.
The first thing you've called for in order to reopen your state is an expansion of testing capacity. I want you to take a listen to what the Vice President and President Trump have said on that issue.
We believe today that we have the capacity in the United States to do a sufficient amount of testing for states to move into phase one at the time and manner that they deem to be appropriate.
As our experts said yesterday, America's testing capability and capacity is fully sufficient to begin opening up the country totally.
Governor Northam just called that delusional, the idea that states have enough testing. What do you think? Do you have enough testing to move into phase one?
I think this is probably the number one problem in America, and has been from the beginning of this crisis, the lack of testing. And I've repeatedly made this argument to the leaders in Washington on behalf of the rest of the governors in America. And I can tell you, I talk to governors on both sides of the aisle nearly every single day. The administration, I think, is trying to ramp up testing. They are doing some things with respect to private labs, but to try to push this off to say that the governors have plenty of testing and they should just get to work on testing somehow we aren't doing our job is just absolutely false. Every governor in America has been pushing and fighting and clawing to get more tests, not only from the federal government, but from every private lab in America and from all across the world. And we continue to do so. Look, we've increased our testing in Maryland by 5,000% over the past month, but it's nowhere near where it needs to be. And as Governor Northam said a moment ago, there are things like shortages on swabs that we don't have anywhere in America. You can't do the test without. On reagents, which is a part of the test. So, look, I think they've made some strides at the federal level. I think states are all working hard on their own to find their own testing. Lab capacity has been increasing, but it's not accurate to say there's plenty of testing out there and the governor should just get it done. That's just not being straightforward.
Protesters gathered in the state capitol yesterday to call for you to reopen businesses, reopen schools. I want you to take a listen to what President Trump said about protests occurring around the country.
I mean, I notice there are a lot of protests out there, and I just think that some of the governors have gotten carried away. We have a lot of people that don't have to be told to do what they're doing. They've been really doing everything we've asked them.
Specifically, I think President Trump is referring to 3 Democratic governors in, coincidentally, I'm sure, 3 battleground states for 2020. But what's your response when you hear the president saying that some governors are going overboard?
Well, look, I think that, first of all, I understand the frustration among the people that want to get things open right away. I'm frustrated also. I mean, I wish I had someone to protest to, but look, we're doing everything we possibly can to reopen in a safe manner, but I don't think it's helpful to encourage demonstrations and encourage people to go against the president's own policy. For example, I mentioned earlier, the president's policy says you can't start to reopen under his plan until you have declining numbers for 14 days, which those states and my state do not have. So then to encourage people to go protest the plan that you just made recommendations on Thursday, it just doesn't make any sense. We're sending completely conflicting messages out to the governors and to the people as if we should ignore federal policy and federal recommendations.
I've been meaning to ask you about this meeting that you attended. You attended a briefing about coronavirus on February 9th with Dr. Fauci and the head of the CDC. You were at the White House for, I guess, governors were having a convention of some sort. You told the Washington Post, quote, the doctors and the scientists, they were telling us then exactly what they're saying now. How stark were the warnings that you were getting in private on February 9th?
Well, so, I'm chairman of the National Governors Association. We had our annual winter meeting in Washington on February 9th. I called that meeting. We added it to our agenda because there were governors. This was at the very beginning of the crisis, I think sort of around the time when the outbreak was just happening in the country in the state of Washington. And we asked for some of these folks to come brief the governors to give us a better understanding of what was happening. And we had Robert Redfield, the head of the CDC, Dr. Fauci, and a number of others. There were 5 panelists from the administration who came, and they gave us a pretty detailed outline of what they felt was happening with this virus and what they thought was a good potential for what might happen in the country. And I can tell you, I left that meeting very, very concerned, and came back the very next day and got our team completely ramped up to try to get to work. We had actually been looking at this since early January and had a preliminary effort ongoing, but when I left that briefing that the administration gave to the governors, we knew that this was going to be a serious crisis.
Governor Larry Hogan of Maryland, thank you so much for your time, sir. Really appreciate it.